So now I want to dive into the show right about now. Before I start diving into, some of the quarterbacks in this draft class, I wanted to say I believe there are 3 NFL teams in the 2021 NFL draft that should seriously look to trade up for a quarterback. Those 3 teams are the Chicago Bears, the Washington football team, and the Minnesota Vikings. The Chicago Bears should be the number 1 team. The Washington football team should be number 2. Minnesota number 3. Let's start off with Chicago and why they should trade up, okay? Now, obviously, the Chicago Bears just moved on from Mitchell Trubisky in the offseason, which was the right move, but a lot of people thought that the Bears would potentially be in the runnings to get Deshaun Watson, maybe Sam Darnold, maybe Russell Wilson, and well, they ended up with Andy Dalton. And Andy Dalton, his best years are behind him. He's not a very dynamic athlete, doesn't have a great arm, he doesn't fit today's NFL. And in a division with Aaron Rodgers, if you have Andy Dalton as your starting quarterback, that is simply not good enough. And it's pretty clear to me that this year is a make or break year, potentially, for Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy. Those 2 guys, if I were to guess, are going to be on the hot seat this year. So they need to win games, and they need a star quarterback to really save this franchise and potentially their jobs, okay? Chicago, they've been starving for a star quarterback for so long. They have a great defense. They have a solid running game. They have playmakers on the outside at wide receiver. If they get consistent quarterback play, then they could be a team that could make things interesting come playoff time. They were a playoff team last year with Mitchell Trubisky. And Mitchell Trubisky was arguably one of, if not the worst starting quarterback in all football. He's a backup quarterback right now. There was no market for the guy. Chicago should trade for a starter quarterback for all the reasons that I mentioned. Up next is Washington. Washington has a lot of things going good for them. It's been a long time since there's been optimism in Washington as far as their football team is concerned. They actually have a really good head coach in Ron Rivera. They've got a great defense led by Chase Young. They've had a good free agency period. They've got a good wide receiver core. Terry McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, Adam Humphries, Kelvin Harmon comes back from injury this year. I just dropped my notes right there. Excuse me. But Washington has a lot of things going for them this year. They have a solid offensive line. They've got a star running back in Antonio Gibson, Washington has a roster that is ready to win right now. They need a franchise quarterback. They thought Dwayne Haskins was the guy. They thought Robert Griffin III was the guy. Kirk Cousins had a cup of coffee for a while in Washington. They've gone through so many quarterbacks, and I would hate for this great roster to go to waste because they don't have a great franchise quarterback to allow them to consistently win games. Look, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's a solid quarterback. He could provide some stability for about a year, but you can't sell to the fan base that Ryan Fitzpatrick is your long-term guy. I don't quite know what Taylor Heineke is, so I got to trade up for a star quarterback potentially if I'm Washington. They need a star quarterback, and if they can get a franchise quarterback that is just somewhat serviceable, they can win 10 games pretty much every single year because of that great defense. And by the way, you're not going to get Chase Young and Montez Sweat and these great playmakers on your defense for the cheap for a long time. Eventually, Chase Young's going to want to get paid. Montez Sweat's going to want to get paid. Guys like Terry McLaurin are going to want to get paid, etc., etc. Last but not least is Minnesota. I believe the Minnesota Vikings should trade for a quarterback, and here's why. Minnesota, aka the Vikings as a team, they're in an interesting spot. They have a solid roster right now that is pretty talented, but not talented enough to win a Super Bowl. I don't put Minnesota in the category as having one of the 10 best rosters in all of football. Now, could they sneak into the playoffs this upcoming year? Yes, maybe. That's possible. But even people in Minnesota's front office, whether they want to admit it or not, they realize this team is not quite a Super Bowl contender. So, if you know you're not going to win the Super Bowl this year, why not try to think long term and think about the big picture? Minnesota has a chance to go and get a star quarterback in this draft. And maybe a draft a guy like Trey Lance or Justin Fields and sit them for a year behind Kirk Cousins. Look, Kirk Cousins, we know what he is. He's an accurate passer when given time to throw. He could get you to the playoffs. But Kirk Cousins has done nothing in his career up to this point to prove that he can go out there and win you a Super Bowl. And by the way, you need a lot around Kirk Cousins for you to win football games. And realistically, a lot of quarterbacks need good players around them. But even if you give Kirk Cousins a top 5 roster, I'm not quite sure if he's going to be able to deliver the goods in the playoffs. I've seen him shrink too many times in big games. So Kirk Cousins has reached his ceiling. You're not going to win a Super Bowl this year. Why not trade up for a star quarterback that you can sit and groom for about a year? And listen, eventually, you're going to have to beat Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers in that division. So I think Minnesota should think long term and say, hey, look, we might be decent now, but let's be great in the future. Let's go get a Trey Lance. Let's go get a guy like Justin Fields. I believe Minnesota is a team that should trade up for a quarterback if they have the opportunity. Thank you so much for watching this video today. Please also note that the Juiciest Sports Podcast is not just a YouTube channel. It is available on all podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this content with all your friends. This podcast is my favorite thing in the entire world right now. It is my passion. And I want more people to listen to this podcast. I really want this podcast to grow. Also, a fun fact about me is that I want to go into the sports broadcasting and media world once I graduate from the University of Toledo, a college in Northern Ohio. I am looking to become one of the next great sports broadcasters and analysts out in the world. And I potentially would like to start my own network if this podcast really truly grows. Or if I fall short of that goal, I would love to work for a big-time network like ESPN or Fox Sports 1. I am open to all networks. So if you believe in my dreams and you see or hear my passion through the screen, be sure to tell all your friends about the Juiciest Sports Podcast. Stay motivated, you guys. Have a God-blessed day, and I'm out.